to everyone, or good afternoon to anyone in time zones ahead of us. Welcome to the first status conference for phase 2 of this investigation of a Microgrid Services Tariff, docket number 2018-0163. My name is Ashley Alkawili. I'm a staff attorney with the Commission, and I will be facilitating today's status conference with Gina Yi, who is an engineer here at the Commission. We last met on January 28th for a technical conference kicking off phase 2 of this proceeding. We want to thank the parties for all their efforts so far and for all their participation in the important work being done in this docket. We know that these issues we'll be addressing are complex and that this will be a big task ahead. So today is the first of several quarterly status conferences that the Commission will be holding with the working group throughout phase 2. The purpose for today's status conference is for the Commission and the parties to discuss the working group's progress towards completing the requested work products for phase 2 of this docket. So these work products were described in order number 38293. A few housekeeping matters for today's status conference. Please note that status conference is being live streamed for public viewing on the Commission's YouTube account, and the recording will be available after today. As with other conferences, we ask that each participant be respectful of the time and perspectives of the other various participants. Since this is a remote conference, we're also providing some guidance for your participation. First, please mute yourselves if you are not presenting or speaking. Please raise your hands using the raise hand feature of WebEx. Alternatively, you can also physically raise your hand on screen. And finally, please lower your hands when you are finished speaking. Also, while this conference is open to the public, in the interest of time and to ensure that the Commission's questions are addressed, the Commission will be directing questions to the docket parties. So to provide an overview for today's status conference, I'll briefly go over today's agenda. After this welcome and introduction, the working group will give their status report. Afterwards, we'll have a discussion on the working group status report and updates. This will be followed by questions from the Commission and any clarifications needed. And we'll end with next steps and some closing remarks. So to help situate ourselves and any members of the public with respect to where we are in this docket, I'll briefly review the overall objectives and the priority issues that were determined for this phase of the proceeding. The objectives for phase 2 were set out in the Commission's guidance letter filed on September 21st, 2021. These objectives are continuing the development of the tariff, enhancing the tariff to support broader use of microgrids in non-emergency situations, further exploring opportunities to support resiliency through microgrid development. Finally, identifying grid services that can be provided by microgrids. So based on these objectives, the parties' recommendations for the priority topics for phase 2, and the discussion held during the January 28th technical conference, the Commission determined the following issues and goals should be prioritized for phase 2. First, microgrid compensation and grid services. Grouped under this issue are harmonization with other programs' grid service mechanisms, customers with existing DER and DR grid service agreements, and resilient services and compensation, including societal and environmental value, to inform development of a resilience tariff. Utility compensation is also a priority issue. Within this topic are standby charges, exit fees, and/or other charges. A priority for phase 2 is also consumer protection and related considerations, as well as interconnection. And our final priority for phase 2 is working group coordination with related microgrid and resilience initiatives at Hawaiian Electric and government agencies. Under this issue are sub-issues of identifying critical facilities, identifying a variety of funding mechanisms for microgrid development, including possible state and federal funds that can be leveraged to support pilots and/or demonstration projects, as well as identifying community needs, better understanding barriers to microgrid development, such as economic project opportunities and technical expertise, and what would make the microgrid tariff more attractive for developers. And finally, customer education and outreach. So that brings us to the present. For today, we will proceed with the working group status report, and I will turn this over to the working group co-chairs, Marcy and Mark. I believe you're stepping in for Kristen today.
Yep, that's right. Thank you. I'll go ahead and share my screen. But my name is Mark Wong. I'm the manager of our community and commercial programs area at Hawaiian Electric. And we are administering the microgrid program, including Microgrid Services Tariff Phase 1, and then implementation and operationalization of Phase 2. We also do the community-based renewable energy program and manage our commercial programs like SIA. As mentioned, we have Marcy Chang with the Consumer Advocate and Kristen Senda from my team who will be co-leads for this Phase 2 working group. Fortunately, Kristen won't be available to attend this status update, but we do have this presentation we'll go through. I'll ask Marcy to take us through that. And we have several folks from Hawaiian Electric that will also cover some of the content. And so with that, again, thank you and appreciate the opportunity for us to provide an update. And with that, I'll hand it over to Marcy.
Morning, can you hear me? This is Marcy.
Yep.
Yes, Marcy, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. And I'm having some technical difficulties. So I also have to turn off my video. I think it's causing some garbling on my side. But good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity for us to provide, I guess, status on the, I guess, where we are on the microgrid Phase 2. My name is Marcy Chang. I'm with the Chief Engineer with the Division of Consumer Advocacy. And I'll be going over some slides of what the working group has already, or where we are. Mark.
Hey, Marcy, your audio is a little garbled. I'm not sure if you're able to dial in or
Let me see if I can dial.
Okay.
Let me try dialing.
Maybe to keep things going, I can go ahead and proceed with the presentations. And if I miss anything, others can jump in. But for the
Thanks, Mark.
5th status report, we did have a preliminary working group meeting last Friday with participants, and we'll share some of the discussion. We'll recap the working group objectives that was shared in the earlier presentation and kind of align that with what we want to accomplish in the working group. And then we'll cover the proposed meeting schedule and format, what our high-level work plan looks like, in how that aligns with the topics, priority topics for Phase 2. And then we'll cover a little bit about what this looks like, coordination with other dockets and initiatives. And finally, we'll provide an update on ETIP. So as mentioned, Kristen Senda and Marcy Chang will be co-chairs, similar to how we did the Phase 1 working group. Kristen and Marcy will be responsible for coordinating the activities of the working group, making sure that folks have the invite, scheduling that, managing the meetings. We do have a note on here about ground rules, and we haven't specifically discussed this as a working group team, but generally the ground rules will be designed to help focus the discussions and make sure we have an efficient discussion to meet the objectives and the deliverables for the working group. So the co-chairs will help manage that. And finally, making sure that we have the status reports and the final report for the working group conclusion of this, these sessions. Similar to Phase 1, we first reached out to the docket participants. And I know that's changed a little bit since the initialization of the docket, but we do have confirmed that Jerry Sumida with Ulupono Initiative will be representing that group in the working group. Previously, we had Chris DeBone with the DER Council, and he declined to participate in this session. Same with, we also reached out to the Microgrid Resources Coalition. And, as most of you have been involved with phase one, was a participant. We haven't confirmed that they will be participating in this. We've made a few outreaches, and I think in the conclusion of our last meeting, some other folks were going to try to reach out to make sure. And really the reason is kind of key to the objectives. We want to make sure that we have representatives from the industry, that voice is heard, because I think what we learned in the January 28th conference was that we need to make sure that the program rules are set up for developers to be attracted to develop microgrids in Hawaii, and that they have a voice in this conversation. Energy Island remains one of the docket participants. We have not yet confirmed participation there. But outside of the docket participants, we are planning on reaching out to additional entities. Primarily, I think, in the interest of getting development locally, local developers, and there's a few that are interested in microgrids, as well as reaching out to other jurisdictions. Like in the January 28th conference, we had a great presentation from PG&E, and they're taking similar steps that we are. So definitely want to collaborate with those folks. And then we do have several Hawaiian Electric subject matter experts. And I think when we get to the slide for the number of other dockets and initiatives, it's really a lot of the same folks, which is an advantage. So we can easier make sure everything is coordinated. To the next slide. Just to orientate everyone, on the left side is the objectives that was shared earlier in the PUC presentation. And so we've translated those here and summarized some sub-bullet points. But we did have a discussion about the specific working group objectives. And these aren't in any particular order. We just wanted to list them here, and expect that these will be discussed in future working group meetings and refined. But first and foremost is, as mentioned, we want to make sure that we leverage resources and streamline efforts with other dockets. And there honestly is a lot of stuff going on, a lot of different deadlines. So part of the co-lead's role is to make sure that we're aligned with that and working with all the participants in the working group on that effort. Secondly, focusing on resiliency. We really want to hit to the heart of Act 200. And this kind of rolls into making sure that we identify the right use cases and the right customers who can take advantage and have the needs for this resiliency, defining what that looks like. Third is understanding how the tariff can support microgrid operations in non-emergency situations. So, this was something that, is in the objectives and something we want to make sure that we cover in this phase 2, and make sure that we develop a program where these microgrids that are in non-emergency situations are harmonized with existing programs, compensation structures, and things like that. Fourth is we want to make sure that we keep costs at a minimum for all customers. And this was kind of touched upon in the January 28th conference, that we want to make sure that we use the right tool in the toolbox, that microgrids aren't the one-all solution, that if there's another initiative like grid hardening of the equipment in the system, that might bring the same resiliency and meeting other objectives, but at a lower cost. And so we're going to try to keep that in mind as we develop this and make sure that there's not a cost shift that occurs. And then, of course, lastly, encouraging development of grid services and also coordinating with the DER docket on that. In terms of our meeting schedule and format, this is what we have set up initially here. And I think depending on how things proceed, we may schedule additional meetings as needed or extend them. And like we discussed, that other dockets may drive some of these meetings. And if we need a specific deliverable in another area, that's timed well with these working group meetings. We have an efficient discussion. But initially, we're thinking of meeting every 3 weeks and then having those to be 2-hour sessions. As mentioned, Hawaiian Electric will take the lead in the administrative role in making sure that everyone's attending and we have the right information. We also have a Microgrid Services Tariff website carrying off what we did on phase 1. So all of our meeting minutes, agenda, and discussions and presentations will be posted publicly for transparency. So anybody who's interested can pick this up, Google search, they'll come across this and they'll have that information at hand. And then one thing that was really useful in phase 1 was just the parking lot issue. And I know that that became sort of the basis for what we're looking at on phase 2. We are going to utilize that because I think that was an effective tool, but not meaning that those things are going to be dropped off the list. We will look for other opportunities to expand on those discussions and kind of related to keeping these meetings efficient and to the topic at hand. We don't want to, try to cover too many topics and not end up making any progress. So we'll utilize the parking lot to facilitate that. Next is the high-level work plan. And this is based largely on the priority issues. So we took a stab and looked at things like the timing of other things going on and what information is available and will be available at certain points as we sequence through these working group meetings. So as I mentioned, we did have a working group meeting last Friday, and it did cover the objectives and sort of like the format on how we're going to proceed and a discussion about which issues we were going to try to tackle first. So I think the first half of the meetings here is a little bit more detail, and then we intend to refine this. The second half on the next slide is going to have a little more work left to flesh that out. But in terms of coming up on May 17th, this month, that's going to be our next working group meeting. And so we're going to cover some of the items like ground rules and kind of further refining the next working group meetings. But really trying to get the connections with the other initiatives going on so that if we need to onboard anyone else from those initiatives that they're identified, we can bring them in the loop as early as possible. And then we thought it would be good to look at the barriers for microgrid development and kind of what we could do to improve the tariff and making sure that this is a program that's attractive for developers. So this is where we're going to look at developers, mainland and local developers, to kind of represent and bring their voice to this and kind of ask the question, were you aware of the tariff and kind of what held you back from participating? And so we can bring that feedback up front and then develop action items to address those items earlier in the process. So that'll be the May 17th meeting. It's a lot of stuff in one meeting. And as mentioned, we do plan to have outside discussions along the way. Our next meeting schedule on June 7th, we're looking to address the critical facilities and community needs. So Ken Arumaki is going to give a quick overview on the ETIP initiative in a later slide. But I know that in July timeframe, we're going to be looking at doing a community outreach at that point. So we may not have final information, but I think we can start the discussion and identifying what those critical facilities look like so we can get that early in the process and help define what types of use cases there are for microgrids. Next up is on June 28th, we're planning on tackling the compensation and grid services mechanisms and standby charges. This was something that we felt should be addressed early, and I think we can have this discussion just based on what types of dependencies we currently have. And then in July 19th, we're going to be looking at resiliency services and compensation, and kind of lined up with the way Act 200 tells us is to make sure that we have that societal environmental value incorporated into the tariff. And then we'll also use this meeting as just for a prep to make sure that we're lined up and well prepared to have a substantive and in-depth discussion on July 28th's status conference. As I mentioned, the latter half of the meetings, we still have a little bit more work to determine specifically which meeting group topics, what that's going to look like. But, you know, I think with the other dockets going, things like the grid services mechanisms, interconnection that are occurring in other dockets, maybe better time to have that discussion in the latter half. So we can incorporate that with Microgrid Services Tariff discussions. And then again, we'll have the status conference on October 27th, and we'll use subsequent meetings so that we can finalize our final report and recommendations and tariff revisions so that can be drafted before the end of the year. Mentioned the overlap. Again, we're going to cover this on our next meeting in May, but there is several other dockets and initiatives that kind of touches the phase 2 Microgrid Services Tariff. So those are listed here. DER docket, IGP, the resiliency programs, definitely big. RFPs for grid services, definitely high involvement. But behind the scenes, we'll be working with subject matter experts, government agencies, and other organizations to flesh out what those dependencies look like and when deliverables from those other initiatives are going to be due so that we can better coordinate with that. So we'll be utilizing a Microsoft project schedule behind the scenes to try to keep track of all of these activities. With that, Ken, if you're able, would you mind providing a quick overview of the ETIP project?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. So yeah, this is a quick update. This is actually the similar slide that was presented the last time. The last time we were in this completed phase where September to January 2022 data transfer phase completed. We're still in that phase where we provided all the data to the national labs, and right now the national labs are kind of processing and developing the actual map. So there's nothing to show at this time. It's really just being worked on by the national labs, and around the June, July timeframe, we should have some kind of a draft that we can share. So that's what's currently in progress. The February to July is the actual development of the map. That's it. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Ken. This is the, let's see, final slide. So I'll close, you know, since the order came out, largely activities have been around making sure that we have all the members for the working group lined up. We've had the first initial formal meeting to kind of line out the activities next. And we had pretty good attendance in that meeting. PUC staff thankfully was there and provided some good feedback. And I think, you know, this status conference, we invite others to provide any feedback or comments so we can make sure that we're well aligned. as we progress through the working group. So with that, I'll close and open up the next agenda topic, which I believe was discussion over the working group summary status.
Okay, thank you, Mark and Ken. And I just wanted to check, Marcy, were you able to get back online?
Oh, yes, I am. Sorry, I'm calling in by phone. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, great. And you sound a lot more, we can hear you a lot better now. So with that, thank you to the working group and your the co-chairs for their update. We'll open up for discussion. So do the parties have any questions, comments, or thoughts that they'd like to share based on the update that the working group provided?
Hi, this is Gina from the PUC. I have a quick question for HICO, the ETIP summary that was just given. So is the idea that after the finalization of the results from ETIP, the Hawaiian electric companies are going to go out and prioritize marketing and outreach in areas identified as priorities?
Good question.
Yep. Sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead, Ken. Yeah.
So as part of the ETIP, we were creating the map to figure out what potential spots there were for customers. I think we haven't thought of that like next step of after the map. I mean, my thinking was we would publicize that the map exists and we would put it somewhere on Hawaiian Electric's website so that folks could go there and use it as a resource. And probably use that as well, like, you know, when we do community outreach on other initiatives, that's something else that, another tool that we could provide as we go out.
Yeah, to add on to that, I mean, we haven't had that specific discussion as a working group, but I think that's part of the strategy is using the ETIP information as a tool to help guide us on our outreach. We're going to be trying to outreach to as many folks as we can, and you know, through other programs, we've gotten feedback on what folks are trying to achieve through resiliency. So I think you know, trying to focus that effort and try to create categories or use cases can be helpful for us to help shape the way the tariff looks.
Okay, thank you for that. Just wanted to check if anyone, before we move on to any questions from the commission, did anyone else from the public or any of the other parties have any questions or comments that they want to raise? Okay, seeing none, or seeing and hearing none, we'll move on to questions from the commission. So Gina and Andrew, I'll hand it over to you.
Sure, I have a question for the working group at least. I think I did cover this in the initial meeting, and we had some conversation around this topic, but does the working group have a particular path forward on what it thinks it should do about compensation? And is there a preferred pathway on compensation? We heard a lot about so far about the use of the grid services as a primary path for compensation, but is that a preferred way for the working group at this point in time?
We haven't specifically discussed that strategy yet, but Mercy, if you're on, do you have anything to share with the team here?
No, yeah, thanks, Mark. Actually, I don't know. We still have to discuss that, Andrew. But I think, I think we'd be looking at, all forms of compensation. One would be like the resiliency fee, would also be looked at, and also, several of the customer, like microgrids are able to participate in the DER program, so that still is a compensation mechanism for them. And that would be one thing I think we'd also look at.
Okay, thank you. I guess my next question revolves around phase one projects or any potential phase one projects. Does the working group at this time know if there's any potential phase one projects? Not that if you can't talk about it, that's fine. Obviously, if there's agreements still being worked out, we don't want to jeopardize those agreements. But specifically, there was talk about the Nelha Host Park as being a potential like phase one project with additional commission, um, flexibility to be implemented. Do you folks have any updates on any other phase one projects or the Nelha Host Park phase one project potentially?
This is Mark. I can comment just on the phase one applications, the tariff application. So we still have not received any formal applications. So similar update to the January 28th conference. And we want to dig into a little bit more about the reasons why there wasn't, what the barriers were. In terms of Nelha, I don't know if is Ken or is there any other folks from the Hawaiian Electric side that might have some more updated information on that? No. Yep, not hearing anything, but we can follow up, Andrew, on that.
Andrew, did you have any more questions to ask?
Thank you. That's all my questions.
Okay. So I have a few questions for the working group. Based on the lessons learned from phase one of this proceeding, what do the parties perceive to be the primary barriers to microgrid development? For example, are they economic incentives for developers or education and outreach for customers?
Marcy, I could probably take a stab at that. That's, I guess, something that was identified in the January 28th conference. So similar to the efforts that we've done in other programs, like more recently in shared solar or CBRE, in the upcoming, in the DER docket, we have resources within the company to do that outreach. And I think as we work through this working group, that's going to be something we're going to be looking at in parallel, trying to draw specific deliverables and action items for our team to develop and then have that collaborated and reviewed by the working group itself. So examples might be creating simple program guides to help folks that are unaware of the program and are kind of seeing it for the first time and walking through what the tariff could potentially provide and what benefits are there. And we can then drive additional discussions as they go down that path, perhaps in conjunction with them working with a developer to hopefully get an application put in at some point. But I think the specifics will still largely depend on what program elements we develop. But I think we have a pretty effective outreach team as it is. And so our intent is to leverage those resources.
Thank you. In the PBR docket, the companies filed an innovation pilot framework work plan. In this work plan, the companies identified various areas of collaboration, one of which was resilience and innovative reliability approaches. Do the companies have a plan to utilize the innovation pilot framework to propose pilot projects that can support microgrid development under this docket's Microgrid Services Tariff?
Oh, Mark. Oh, Gina, could I take a try at this one? I think, I know it's directed to the company, but I think, that is something I think that we would discuss within the working group process. I think, one of the things I think that we look at, that's why we're trying to focus on critical facilities and see where development of, microgrids could meet those needs as well as the community needs that could kind of help inform pilot process or progress or program.
Okay, thanks, Marcy. And a final question from me. One of the company's consultants suggested in the last technical conference that there are technical and/or engineering complexities associated with the development of microgrids. Can the companies elaborate on examples of such complexities? What resources are at the company's disposal to address them?
I think that might have come from Paul DiMartini. I think he, well, I'm not sure if he's on the line, but maybe may I ask if Ken or Mark to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I recall that comment. I mean, I think that's just like a general comment that hybrid microgrids, because there's like interaction with the utility, and there's the use of the utilities lines and infrastructure, that it's just complex. We tried to address that through the phase 1 tariff by creating that hybrid microgrid agreement, which also kind of encompasses like a standardized interconnection agreement approach. I guess with the phase 2 working group, further discussion can be had on that. But it's really hard to like address technical issues like in a standardized manner, without that interconnection or that microgrid agreement.
Thank you.
Well, Gina, could I add? Oh, this is Marcy. I think one thing that what the working group would like to do is kind of bring in the resources to kind of level set actually what's happening in other places, to kind of look into that particular issue and the other issues that was discussed by Mark, if that helps.
Yes, it does. Thank you, Marcy. Those are all my questions. I'd like to open the floor up to the commissioners. Do you have any questions for the working group?
Hi, this is Jenny. I don't have any questions for the working group. Thank you.
No questions from me either. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so it looks like we can move on to next steps, unless there are other questions from the parties or the commission staff. Our next status conference will be on Thursday, July 28th. Subsequent important filing dates include the November 3rd date for phase 2 filing of the phase 2 working group report, and January 6th for the draft Microgrid Services Tariff. Working group meetings will be ongoing through November. And as a reminder, parties have the option to invite speakers from the last technical conference to future status conferences or working group meetings for additional insight and resources. And I'll turn it over to you, Ashley.
Right. Thank you, Gina. So thank you to everyone who contributed your thoughts and insights today. As a reminder to the working group, please be sure to file your slides from today into the record. So we want to thank the working group and the working group co-chairs for your update for all your hard work and collaboration so far. And we are looking forward to the upcoming working group meetings. Working group members, please reach out to us if the Commission can provide any help or guidance to you in the future. So with that, this concludes today's status conference. We hope you'll have a good rest of your week. Take care, and we look forward to seeing you all at the next status conference on July 28th. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.